things have been kicking off in Syria somewhat. Assad and his ex-wife, whatever, in exile over in Moscow. Well, she for now. And it's all been falling rather apart in Syria. Unfortunately, that means that a load of even worse people, ISIS terrorists who are under lock and key from the previous regime, could potentially be let out within a matter of days. Let's speak to Mesa Gifford, former British volunteer fighter in Syria and author of Fighting Evil, the ordinary man who went to war against ISIS. Mesa, I mean, what is the level of issue that we might now face if all of these ISIS fighters, former ISIS fighters, are given their freedom?
Well, it does several things. One is there are dozens, potentially, of British citizens or former British citizens that could come back to the UK. That would strain our judicial system. There's how are we going to get witnesses from Syria and the infrastructure put together to actually effectively try these people in the UK? The real danger is that actually they'll be out within a year, because they could be effectively tried under certain legislation, like joining a terror group and all the rest of it. But the actual crimes that they committed out in Syria are going to be very difficult to actually put in front of a judge. Much broader, though, is the thousands of other prisoners that could potentially be released. There's a real danger here that the US government is very much putting the feelers out to sort of say, we're giving up on Syria. And the big danger there is the local people, the people who defeated the Islamic State and are currently imprisoning these people. We should be supporting them. By pulling away from them, we trusted them to get rid of ISIS. We should also trust them to deliver justice by putting these people on trial in Syria. So that's what I would hope to see happen here.
So you'd like to see the West being a lot more interventionary, for want of a better phrase, rather than sort of taking a step back. I mean, I find that the whole Syria situation is so impossible to understand. My gist is that I think there's around, 1,500 odd tribes, clans, factions, all fighting for territory. It's a sort of big smorgasbord of different interests over in that country. How on earth could it ever be controlled? Who should we be, how should we be interacting?
Well, the main partner on the ground for Britain and America is the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. This is the group that came together, that believe in progressive values, democracy. In a very conservative region, it's very refreshing what they've been talking about over the last 10 years. Things like gender equality, talking about democracy. As I said, they were the ones that defeated the Islamic State. I fought alongside them in Raqqa and many other places in northern Syria. I saw them, the healing effect of what they were trying to build. The SDF itself is a multi-ethnic, multi-faith fighting force. And as I said, if it would be a shame to rescue these people from Syria when they haven't spent a day in court in Syria where they committed their crimes. By taking agency away from local people, by bringing them back to the UK, we strain our own judicial system. We put tremendous strain on MI5 and the police, the wider police, who are already under a lot of strain with the amount of terrorists that they're following. The idea of bringing more from Syria without actually coming up with a much better plan, a local plan that helps local people, is setting us up for a disaster.
The SDF, how big are they? How much of a force could they be? Because, like I said, there seems to be so many different factions here. If we gave them support, have they got what it takes to be able to conquer some of these darker powers?
Well, it's just if you narrow the real power centers down, there's the sort of Turkish-backed rebels in the far north. You then have the other rebels, the FSA, which is largely HTS, which is a former jihadist, they call themselves a former jihadist organization. How much they've reformed, we're going to have to wait to see. They're the new power brokers in Damascus. They're the ones that toppled Assad, who was the other power in the region until recently. There is another path. It's not a binary choice between the rebels and the regime. I've always argued that a third way was necessary, and that third way has always been the SDF. The SDF control about sort of 30% of the country. About 80% of the oil of the country is controlled by them. They exist in a very multicultural area of Syria, but is predominantly Kurdish. And they're the only people in Syria that talk openly about democracy and equal rights, freedom, equality, that sort of stuff. And these are the ones that Britain and America found it very easy to support way back when I was fighting alongside them against ISIS. And it was together with the coalition, with the wider international community, that these local people defeated the Islamic State. They imprisoned 70,000 jihadist fighters and their wives and families in vast camps, which the West has been funding, but they haven't come up with a political solution for the people of eastern Syria. In fact, on many occasions, they've threatened to abandon them. And who are we abandoning these people to? HDS, to jihadists. And there's a real danger that the war could kick off again. The SDF has 100,000 soldiers under arms. It's a vast army. And if we don't come up with a plan to put these people into prison, these jihadists, but also support the locals that we want to support, there's a real chance that the war will kick off again and the civil war will drag on for many more years to come.
Talk to me now about Russia, Ukraine, because you've been out fighting there as well. Donald Trump has suggested that Vladimir Putin's invited him for a sit-down, cosy chat, and that he's minded to go and speak to Putin about a way of settling things in Ukraine. He's been very consistent on that. A lot of people have been worried about what that might mean, whether he might sort of succumb to territory grabs by Putin, might sort of allow the West to roll over and have their bellies tickled by Russia, and Russia will be rewarded for their hostile and aggressive action. Although I've sort of had it suggested to me by the people who are close to Trump that quite the opposite is true. He might say one thing on the outside, but behind the scenes he's quite insistent that Zelensky is backed to the hilt and thinks that he can take on Trump. Do you think that a chat between Putin and Trump would be welcome or ominous?
I think it's welcome. I think the trouble is, as Reagan said, you can get peace today. The fastest way to peace is to surrender. And there's been many people on both sides arguing for that for a while. Donald Trump just wants to see the war end. The people in his camp see China as a far greater threat than Russia. But Donald Trump, I think, in the last few months is starting to wise up to a reality. And the reality is that the China issue, the Russia issue, and all the rest of it are linked. There is such a thing as an axis of evil on this planet. It includes countries like Iran, North Korea, China, Russia. These countries are working together. They want to see American and Western power generally diminish so they can exploit the vacuum that would give. And I think Ukraine very much is the front line in this new Cold War that we find ourselves in. I really hope that Donald Trump comes into office and takes this incredibly seriously. And most importantly, if Russia does not return the land that it took after the 2022 invasion, then I think they should double down and start supporting Ukraine. But we're just going to have to wait to see exactly what Donald Trump is thinking, because he's incredibly hard to read at the moment for some reason.
He is indeed keeping his cards close to his chest, and perhaps rightly so. Mesa, it's always great catching up with you. Mesa Gifford, their former British volunteer fighter in Syria.